policy and everything else?
Well, there are two things. First of all, you asked if there was anything that was left out. As I said, the important items were there, but there's one thing you might want to explain to the audience, and the reason for the secrecy that you mentioned. Why were they concealing their identities? Why did they deny that they went to this meeting? And the answer is because if the American people had known that this bill, which was supposed to protect the American people from the big bad bankers, was actually written by those same bankers, well, then the scam would have been out in the open. And that's why they had to keep the whole thing secret until many years after the meeting took place.
Hey, okay, so Edward, hang on just a second. We just did a story this week where the unions and all of these people are saying the big bag banks are getting all of our money. And I thought to myself, well, wait a minute, the unions are the ones that racked up all this debt. Then the government takes the money from the taxpayers and then has given it to the banks. The banks are the ones that are, through the central banks, causing all this problem. Mark, can you help me on this? I mean, it's...
well, very much so. I mean, what we've seen is the central bank pushing all this money into the system. The Federal Reserve very much played a key role in creating the housing bubble to begin with. I mean, you might remember after the dot-com bubble burst,
right,
after 9/11, we cut rates. The Fed cut rates. Greenspan took them to historic lows. The mortgage market, the housing market took off, and eventually that bubble was going to burst, and it burst in 2006 when the Fed started raising rates. So they played a very big role in this, and they're trying to create bubbles today. If you look at what the quantitative easing is doing, you look at the interest rates we're seeing now.
Would you agree with me? It's the last one. It's the last bubble. I think I dubbed this maybe in 2005. I think I said housing bubble, and then we're going to have the last one, the money bubble.
Yes.
It is the last one, too.
Well, let's hope it's the last one. I suspect that after this bubble burst, the Fed's going to look for a way to try to create another bubble to try to make us forget about the last bubble. And that's really the way they were doing it. And there was a very conscious attitude in 2003, 2004 to say, okay, we're coming off this recession across with the dot-com bubble. What do we do to make people feel wealthier? What do we do to get people to go out and spend? And what they decided to do was, let's gin up the housing market. Everybody will feel like they have a lot of money.
Right.
It'll a lot of people to work. And so what are they trying to do now? Let's gin up the stock market. So it really is creating one bubble to try to offset the effect of the last bubble.
So, Edward, let me go back to you. We see the way they're working the bubbles now, but let me go back into the past. We see this clump of crashes here. And I know, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's like a panic in the 1890s, either 1892 or 1896, where I believe it was J.P. Morgan that loaned money to the United States. He came in and personally bailed out and said, I'll lend you money. Then another one happened in like 03, and he said, you know, I can't do this anymore. You guys are on your own, but I'll get my friends together and bail you guys out one more time, and they did. And that's what kind of led to this, correct?
Well, that's exactly the historic origin of it. But I think underlying this, we have to recognize the principle of the Ponzi scheme. The system really is a Ponzi scheme as we're living through it right now. It works as long as the money supply continues to expand and expand and expand, like any Ponzi scheme. You pay off the first investors so that they're very happy. They bring in the new investors. As long as it expands, it works. But when it finally stops, the whole thing comes to an end. That's why they have to keep expanding the money supply. Well, when you create money out of nothing, you also face the fact that money goes back into nothing. So this kind of a system makes the expansion and contraction inevitable. The booms and the busts are inevitable. If the money were backed by something solid, like gold or silver, that you just couldn't create out of thin air, well, then there wouldn't be these contractions or expansions. It would be a nice, even playing field.
Most people think that our money is kind of backed by something in Fort Knox. And I have talked to several congressmen who have asked to go see the gold in Fort Knox, and they can't go see the gold in Fort Knox. It is, I mean...
That's, you know, sort of surprising, because one would think that congressmen and I can understand why they might not let me see it. I might want to take some of it out with me.
Well, the largest collection of gold is here at the Federal Reserve, right?
Exactly.
And that's not American money. That's the Fed's.
That's the Fed's, and a lot of what the New York Federal Reserve keeps is gold for other people.
Right.
Like there might be gold for the Bank of England here in New York that they're keeping. And they quite often will just put it on a cart and move it from one person's account to another.
Edward, do you believe we have gold in Fort Knox? I mean, a lot of gold in Fort Knox? Is it still there?
I think it's very naive to think that we have any gold there for the reason you said. If they had it, they would show it. It's as simple as that.
Okay,
they don't have any gold there.
Back in just a second. All right, I want to introduce you to our guest, G. Edward Griffin. He is the author of The Creature from Jekyll Island, which is a book you must read. And then Mark Calabria, he is the Director of Financial Regulation Studies at the Cato Institute. Let me go to Edward here for this question. Whenever you go and talk about the Fed, it immediately goes into crazy town talk. It immediately goes to, and then the Rothschilds took a bottle of wine and kept little orphan children in there while they were sacrificing virgins in volcanoes. And you hear this crazy stuff when the truth is scary enough. Where does this come from? Or why do people feel compelled to go down into crazy town when just sticking to these facts alone should petrify people? Or do you believe it is?
I don't know the answer to that. Well, I don't know the answer to that. I do know that what you say is true, although I find it less and less true. I think in the beginning, when I first began to research this, the reliable information on the Fed was pretty hard to find. So all you really had was this kind of garbage to choose from. A lot of speculation, a lot of theory, a lot of fantasy. But now there's quite a bit of hardcore information out there, and I see that less and less of that is in the way.
Do you think,
happy to report that.
Do you think, because remember, you're talking to the chief conspiracy theorist on planet Earth, I believe I've been dubbed now. Do you believe that this actually kind of works to their advantage? You can just dismiss people. Well, that's crazy. When you say, I want to look at the books of the Fed, I want to know who owns them. Explain to me who is the owner of the Fed, who is issuing all of this debt, who's making all of these decisions or money, and show me your books. They immediately can say, oh, really? Yeah, you don't know who owns this, right? Woohoo. You're like, well, no, that one's a fact. Don't you think it works to their advantage? Either of you have thought of that?
I think it very much does. What they're trying to give you the perception is, I mean, it's monetary policy. I mean, we need to have a bunch of PhDs around the table because this is just too complicated for you to understand. Don't worry yourself. Trust us. You know, we'll get it right. We are, you know, we've got the public interest at heart.
How frightened were you when you heard Greenspan in an interview say, there's stuff, these CDOs and everything else that I don't even understand? And I'm like, what?
Well, that's one of the reasons for the secrecy. They are, I think, scared to death that we will figure out that they don't know what they're doing. And the whole show will be up. We will figure out that they don't know how to run an economy. They don't know how to run monetary policy.
Well, I don't think that's a secret.
No, it's not. No, they haven't figured out that. They still think they've got us snowed.
Edward, when you look at the Fed, any idea who's getting rich? Do they walk away at the end with piles of money? If we all lose, are they still, they're fine? Who's walking away with this?
I don't see it that way. I think these people already have about as much money as they could possibly spend. They started off with so much wealth that another mansion, another jet, another yacht doesn't make that much difference. I think what these people are doing, Glenn, is they're taking the leverage of this power, this financial power, and they're converting that into political power. Their vision now is much bigger than just making money. Their vision is really in terms of controlling nations and in controlling society and in controlling the world. We've all heard that famous phrase, the New World Order. They use this phrase over and over again. It's their phrase, and they're really serious about it. They're taking the money and they're buying up political leaders, they're buying up media outlets, they're buying up large organizations, influencing labor unions and so forth.
Show me how give me an example of where they're buying up media organizations or labor unions.
Well, all right, here's how it works. You know, the human being is a herd animal. we follow in groups. We follow leaders. And so all that anybody needs to do to control a society is to control the leadership of that society through what these people call the power centers. Those are the large organizations, you know, the things that people belong to, and they have leaders and they follow. They respect their leaders. We're talking about political parties,
Sure.
labor unions, church organizations, the obvious things. So they know that if they can dominate just the heads of these organizations, the half of 1% of the population that is in control of the power centers, they've got the masses in line. And so when you look at the tops of these organizations, they're all in line with the Federal Reserve, with the New World Order, and that sort of thing.
Okay. It is
not the membership, but the top.
It's the Saul Alinsky principle of organize the organized. Let me come back. Audience questions, and then I want to ask you, Mark, about Ronald Reagan. The story is that Ronald Reagan was kind of taking on the Fed and rattling the cages, and the Fed taught him a lesson, and he kind of went back into line. We'll get into that in a second.